In the summer of 1518 in the city of Strasbourg, a woman stepped into the street and began to dance. Nobody had asked her to. There was no music, no festival, no reason anyone could see. She just danced, and she did not stop. Within a week, dozens of people had joined her. Within a month, there were hundreds. And some of them, according to the records left behind, danced until they died. This is not a legend that grew in the retelling. It's one of the better documented strange events of the late medieval world. Physicians wrote about it. The city council debated what to do about it. There are notes, expense records, sermons, and yet, more than 500 years later, we still cannot say for certain what we are looking at. So let's walk through it carefully. What actually happened, what the people at the time believed, and what modern researchers think is going on. And let's be honest about where the solid ground ends and the guessing begins. Start with the woman. The chronicles give her a name, Frau Trophäa. One day in July, she walked out of her house and started to dance in a narrow Strasbourg street. She danced through the afternoon. She danced into the evening. When she finally collapsed from exhaustion, she slept, and then she got up and danced again. This went on for days. Her husband was baffled. Her neighbors were unsettled. And then something stranger happened. Other people started doing it too. By the end of the first week, the records suggest around 34 people were dancing. By the time a month had passed, contemporary accounts put the number as high as 400. These were not joyful dancers. Eyewitnesses described them as people in distress, sweating, exhausted, some screaming for help, some begging to be released from whatever had taken hold of them, but unable to stop their own bodies. Their feet were bloody. They danced in their sleep-deprived delirium until they dropped. Now here is where we have to be careful, because the death toll is one of the most repeated parts of this story, and it's also one of the least certain. Some sources from the period claim that at the peak, around 15 people were dying every day, supposedly from heart attacks, strokes, and sheer exhaustion. Other contemporary records don't mention deaths at all, so the dramatic figure, 15 a day, exists, but it comes from sources we can't fully verify, and serious historians treat it with caution. What we can say more confidently is that this was a real, large-scale outbreak of compulsive dancing that genuinely frightened an entire city. The number of dead is murky. The event itself is not. What did the authorities do? This is the part that sounds invented, but it appears to be true. The Strasbourg City Council called in physicians, and the physicians of the day ruled out supernatural causes. No demons, no curse. Instead, they landed on an explanation rooted in the medical theory of the time. This was a case of hot blood. Too much heat in the body, they reasoned, and the cure was to let the afflicted dance it out of their system. So the council didn't try to stop the dancing, they encouraged it. They opened up guild halls. They cleared marketplaces. According to the records, they even hired musicians and paid for professional dancers to keep the afflicted moving, on the theory that the only way out was through. You can probably guess how well that worked. Surrounding exhausted, dehydrated people with drums and pipes and more dancing did not calm them down. If anything, the spectacle seems to have drawn more people in. Eventually, the authorities reversed course. They banned music, shut down the dancing, and instead loaded the worst afflicted into wagons and carried them to a shrine dedicated to Saint Vitus, a saint long associated with this exact kind of affliction. There, the dancers were given small crosses and red shoes, and prayers were said over them, and then, over the following weeks, the outbreak faded. The dancing stopped about as mysteriously as it had begun. So what was it? This is where we leave the documents and enter the realm of theory, and I want to be upfront. Nobody knows for certain. But there are a few leading ideas, and they're worth understanding because each one tells you something about how strange the human body and mind can be. The first theory is poison, specifically ergot, a toxic mold that grows on damp rye, the same fungus tied to the chemistry behind LSD. Eating bread made from contaminated grain can cause ergotism, which produces hallucinations, convulsions, and a burning sensation in the limbs. It's a real condition with a real history, and it was almost certainly present in medieval Europe. For a long time it was a popular explanation for the dancing plague, but there's a serious problem with it. Ergotism typically restricts blood flow to the extremities. It tends to make it very hard to move your limbs, not to keep them moving for days. Coordinated, sustained dancing is close to the opposite of what severe ergot poisoning does to a body. So while ergot is a real toxin and a tempting answer, most researchers now think it doesn't fit the symptoms. The second and currently more favored explanation is something called mass psychogenic illness, sometimes still called mass hysteria, though that term has fallen out of favor. The idea is that under extreme psychological stress, real physical symptoms can spread through a group of people who are all primed to expect them. And the key word there is real. These are not people faking it. The symptoms are genuine. The trigger is psychological rather than chemical. What makes this explanation compelling for Strasbourg specifically is the context. The years leading up to 1518 were brutal in that region. There had been famine, crops had failed, prices had soared, disease, including smallpox and syphilis, was moving through the population. People were desperate, frightened, and worn down. The historian John Waller, who has written extensively about this event, argues that this combination of extreme stress and a deeply religious culture set the stage. And crucially, the people of Strasbourg already had a story ready in their minds, the legend of Saint Vitus, who, it was said, could send a curse of compulsive dancing down upon sinners. When you already believe a dancing curse is possible, and you are already at the absolute edge of psychological endurance, the belief itself can become the mechanism. One person breaks. Others, watching, primed, terrified that they might be next, follow. It's worth pausing on how unsettling that idea actually is. It suggests that under the right conditions of stress and shared belief, a community can essentially talk itself into a physical affliction, that the mind can drive the body to the brink without any poison or pathogen involved at all. And before you file that away as a medieval problem, it's worth knowing that mass psychogenic illness is not extinct. Modern outbreaks have been documented. Episodes of unexplained fainting, twitching, or illness that spread through schools and workplaces, where investigators find no chemical or biological cause and conclude the trigger was psychological and social. The 1518 dancing plague may be the most dramatic case on record, but the underlying phenomenon appears to be a real recurring feature of human beings under pressure. And there's one more layer, which is that 1518 wasn't even the only dancing outbreak in that part of Europe. There are records of similar episodes stretching back across earlier centuries along the Rhine and in the surrounding regions. Smaller events, fewer people, but the same baffling pattern. Strasbourg is simply the largest and best documented of them, which is partly why it's the one we still talk about. So, where does that leave us? Here's the honest summary. We know from multiple independent records that in 1518 a large number of people in Strasbourg danced compulsively, against their will, in visible distress, over a period of weeks. We know the authorities took it seriously enough to consult physicians and ultimately to invoke St. Vitus. The death toll is uncertain and probably exaggerated in the most dramatic retellings. The ergot poisoning theory is appealing but doesn't match the symptoms well. The leading explanation today is mass psychogenic illness, triggered by extreme stress and shaped by the specific beliefs of the people involved. But even that is an interpretation, not a proven fact. The plain truth is that we are reading the records of something that happened 500 years ago, and a certain amount of it will always stay just out of reach. What I find I keep coming back to is not the spectacle of it, but the quiet implication. These were ordinary people, bakers, weavers, mothers, neighbors, who found their own bodies doing something they could not command and could not stop. Whatever the trigger, the fear was real and the exhaustion was real. And the most likely explanation isn't a poison or a curse. It's us, what the human mind can do to the human body when fear and belief and desperation all line up at once. That's the dancing plague of 1518, documented, debated, and still, in the most important sense, unexplained. Thanks for thinking it through with me. If your feet feel like staying still for the rest of the day, consider yourself lucky, and I'll see you in the next one.